Okay, so litigants in person. What are litigants in person? In America, they call it litigants who are acting pro se, I think. Basically, people who are acting for themselves without a lawyer. That's what a litigant in person is. Some of you guys will be litigants in person, either because you are not completely convinced that the lawyers out there are going to be much good, or because you've already spent every last penny that you have fighting this case and you're now having to do it yourself. So I guess what we have to think about is what the problems are with being a litigant in person. Now, if you have a look at the video I've done about lawyers, there's a bit of explanation about the law as well, and some stuff on our website and so on. But the point about the law as it relates to what am I talking about? Parental alienation. The law is pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. Nothing complicated about it at all. What is complicated and is difficult and gets harder the further up the judicial chain you go is the procedure, particularly the family practice rules, which a good family lawyer ought to know, hopefully inside out, and which generally as litigants in person we don't know about. So what are the advantages of being a litigant in person? Well, first and most obviously, you care, right? You give a damn. This is your child. You are going to fight as hard as you can to get residence transferred to you, or to get some contact, or whatever it is you're fighting for. A lawyer essentially is just a hired gun. Some of them may be committed, may have convictions, great. If you can find a lawyer like that, that's great, but you know for damn certain sure that you care. So that's a very good thing. Another big advantage of being a litigant in person is that your only cost of pursuing the matter is the court fees. You don't have to pay solicitors, and you don't have to pay barristers. Or what you might do, which a lot of litigants in person do these days, is to instruct on occasion, when you get a bit out of your depth or something, to instruct a direct access barrister. So back in the day, if you wanted to get the services of a barrister, you had to go and see a solicitor first, which is a bit like one author described as a bit like hailing a taxi, and you've got your taxi driver, and that's you've got to pay him, but he sitting next to him has a navigator who kind of has got to tell him which way to turn. It feels sometimes like you're paying twice for the same thing, but generally speaking, a direct access barrister can be very useful. And again, if you get the right one, and again you have to be very careful about who you choose, a direct access barrister can, as one of the respondents to our survey said, be a godsend. The idea is that you conduct all the case yourself, but you just kind of parachute this guy in or this girl in to help with hearings maybe, or maybe occasionally you want a bit of advice about whether you're doing stuff correctly and so on. The only thing, I suppose, the only slight rider to that is that, as I say, the law is not complicated at all on this subject, and generally speaking it's solicitors rather than barristers that tend to be better at the procedure. Which form to file, how many forms to file, how you fill them in, where you send them, what exactly goes on the form, etc. But because we've got this direct access barrister thing going now, barristers have got a lot more clued up about all that. So yeah, and generally, from our survey, direct access barristers are getting better reviews than solicitors. So that's an option. So yeah, as a litigant you care, a litigant in person you care, and it's many orders of magnitude cheaper. So those two big advantages. Disadvantages, well, one of the advantages of using any lawyer is that you've got somebody who is dispassionate. That is to say, you are kind of really emotionally involved with all this, and sometimes you need somebody who is kind of distal and removed from the process to say, well, Mr. Bloggs, I think, maybe we should kind of wind it down a notch or two, or maybe we should just go for X rather than Y, and we'll help you be more realistic. But again, be careful about that, because sometimes lawyers will tell you don't do this and don't do that because it's just a bit too ambitious, and sometimes that's exactly what you should be doing. You should be really sort of taking the bull by the horns. But generally speaking, certainly if your ex has lawyers, sometimes the lawyers can get together and work stuff out, which would not be possible between you and your ex. But of course, one of the problems with some of these cases is, in fact, I think pretty much all of these cases, is that the alienating parent is a narcissist. I mean, you cannot talk to a narcissist. You can't negotiate with them. You can't come to a reasonable kind of settlement, because they don't understand notions like reasonable or kind or helpful or good for their kids. They don't understand those kind of ideas. They just understand winning. That's it. So query, in these particular cases, whether talking to the other side is going to be particularly useful, or whether, even if your ex's lawyer agrees with your lawyer, whether he's going to be able to convince his client, your ex, that this is the way we should proceed, is another matter. The other kind of big disadvantage, of course, about being a litigant in person is that you don't know what you're doing. Now that can be remedied, of course, by just educating yourself. Have a look on our website again at all the cases. Have a read of the Children Act. It's not, like all acts of Parliament, it's not thrilling reading. It's not a Grisham page turner or anything, but it is interesting, and it's a good piece of legislation. It's not quite perfect, but it's pretty good. And if we could just get judges at particularly the lower levels, at the county court and magistrates in the magistrates court, doing what the Children Act says, which is putting the child's longer term best interests above all other things, then frankly we wouldn't have the problems that we do have. So would we at UCAP recommend being a litigant in person? We would, partly because the evidence seems to be that litigants in person do as well in court, at least, as a lot of lawyers, and partly, of course, because it's just cheaper, and like I say, you've got the will and the conviction that is going to be lacking in anyone other than the child's parent. So overall, we would advocate being a litigant in person. Now, the other thing you can do as a litigant in person, if you want to, is to consider using a McKenzie friend. So a McKenzie friend is someone who is not a lawyer, but who will help you out with all the paperwork and stuff. Now, there are problems with McKenzie friends because they're not regulated by anybody, and we have heard reports of some McKenzie friends being crooks. I mean, I can't really think of a better way of putting it. So you have to be careful. and it may be that some McKenzie friends are not particularly likely to know what they're talking about, but frankly, that's a problem with lawyers as well. And at least with a McKenzie friend, your experiment with them might only cost you a few £100 rather than a few £1,000. So McKenzie friends may be something that is worth looking at, but again, the same comment applies as we have already made to lawyers, which is you're better off doing it yourself pretty much all the time. You will need to you don't need to worry so much at the lower levels about procedure, because district judges generally, whatever their faults may be, and frankly, according to our survey, they do have a few faults. They're usually a bit more relaxed about procedure because they realise that you're a litigant in person and you need a bit of help. As you go further up through the court system, judges seem to be a little bit more stickler for the rules, and that really is the time when, if you're going to use a lawyer, that's when you're probably better off having a lawyer. But if you're going to spend money, if you've got well, it's thousands of pounds. If you've got money to spend, then you're probably better off starting your case as a litigant in person and saving your cash to use on lawyers when it starts to get a bit more complicated, when you're making appeals and such like, as you probably will be. Okay, that's what it's like to be a litigant in person. Thanks for watching.